Jonathan Wallace took over management of his family's property, Minaret Station, in 2005. Since then, it's been extensively developed. Jonathan outlines the development of the property.
We essentially purchased what was an untouched canvas, if you like. It had been run as a traditional high country sheep and beef property. The first winter we wintered about 1,200 stock units. When I say it's an untouched canvas, it was heavily covered in bracken fern. It had very little winter country. We're separated from the main road by Lake Wanaka. We're made up of 6 main river valleys, some of which stretch right to Spine National Park. It's about 27 kilometres of lakefront. This winter we'll winter around 22,000 stock units. That's primarily made up of red deer, around 60% deer, 25% sheep and 15% cattle. We started with Hereford cows and we've been using black bulls for the last 8 years. So we're an Angus cow herd now. And the sheep, we have our own breeding program as part of a group we call Headwaters. So it's a crossbred sheep made up of Perrindale, Finn, Texel and Romney. And it suits the property very, very well. The first stage of development was primarily capital development on fencing and infrastructure and burning and oversowing. The second stage of development has been conversion of bracken and scrub into clover ryegrass pasture. And we've been doing that by a combination of spraying with glyphosates in the autumn and then burning over the winter. And then we go in and with a set of giant disc what we can, and then oversow everything with a helicopter and then top dress with an airplane. It's a huge lift in production from what it came from, given that the land, a lot of it was carrying no stock at all. The flats carry on average around 12 stock units to the hectare. The down country, which is what we're on here now, carries on average around 6 stock units to the hectare. And the hill carries between 2 and 4, excluding the summer grazing. So it's a big lift in production and one which we aim to sustainably continue without high inputs. So the grass species that we've gone to use on the hill and downs have been the older cultivars. We've gone back to using nui, ruanui, huia white clover, and the annual ryegrass is manure.
Okay, Spud.
The major limiting feature of a lot of high country properties is the balance of country between winter and summer country. We're no different really. We have a huge amount of summer country, but winter is the limiting factor. So there's currently around 400 hectares of flats, cultivatable flats, which include direct drilled areas. And we're in the process now where we've got to step up the production on that. But, you know, as we move from 22,000 stock units to 30,000 stock units, we're not going to develop the minaret out of minaret, if you like. I guess part of the labour requirement at Minaret is that we have a small helicopter based on the property. It's, you know, it's essentially a labour unit. It's involved in probably 80% of the stock work on the hill and downs. It's a vital part of how we operate the station.
It's very isolated. Every Wednesday I take them to preschool, so that's the day when I do all my shopping and bits and pieces. On a Wednesday involves we in the boat by 8 o'clock, and we'll boat. Actually, you can't leave the boat on the other side of the lake, so someone's got to take you across, and they'll drop us at Camp Creek, which is probably 15 minutes in the boat. Some days it's a nice trip, other days it's not so nice. I grew up the Ricard Gorge on a station, Double Hill Station, and so it's quite like here, the sheep and cattle, and it was quite isolated, just like here, so I was quite lucky I didn't come from a city and move here. So I've sort of grown up with it and used to it, so it makes life easier.
There's no doubt that whilst we live in a wonderful environment up here, It is a very challenging one for farming. It is quite a fragile environment too, so it just emphasises that you have to develop and foster a sustainable systems. You just have to keep a close watch on things, and the animals and the environment tells you very quickly if you've got it out of balance. But I'm adamant that grazing can coexist with conservation. Whether it can coexist with preservation is another thing. The high country's got a long history in New Zealand. It's deep in our heritage, if you like, and like all industry starts off, it went through an exploitation phase where there was no incentive really to look towards the next generation or to look towards the next year, if you like. Since the introduction of the pastoral lease system, which essentially gave farmers the equity in the land, knowing that they had the right to it in perpetuity, they would invest sustainably. The pastoral lease system predated the Resource Management Act. But more recently, we've seen, governments, I hate to draw on politics, but the reality is that we have been the subject of political intervention into things which were usually governed by law and valuation. I mean, DOC can be a very good land manager, but it's whether they're actually doing anything different that was happening before, given that in a farming and pastoral lease environment or farming and freehold environment, it creates tax revenue. Tenure review itself is not unfair. It involves two parties who enter into a voluntary good faith relationship, but that has been distorted more recently. There's been an emphasis in trying to push people into tenure review. And has it really been a willing buyer, willing seller situation when the alternative is to carry on as a pastoral lease with exorbitant rents and a government which is interpreting the legislation or distorting it to make it hard to farm? Now, all New Zealanders want to know that the high country's been looked after. They want to know that they have access to it, even if they're not going to ever use that access. But they're productive operations. They are productive enterprises, which at a time like this, New Zealand's got to be looking at fostering that any way it can.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.